All right, Peter. Thank you so much for joining me in the house that BetAngel built. Really appreciate your time. The purpose of today is to sort of pick your brain in terms of both your trading experience and everything that you've done over the past, what is it, 20 years,
Yep.
and also the development of your incredibly popular, sophisticated software tool, BetAngels, and all the great content that you've created in between. So, I'm not sure exactly how this narrative would play, but I'd love to find out how did you get started in Betfair markets?
Yeah, well, I've always loved sport. I used to play a lot of sport when I was younger, not so much now. But I've always loved sport, so either playing it or watching it, doing all of those things. And if you go right back to the very start, the thing that got me interested sort of in gambling markets was I read the book Beat the Dealer by Ed Thorpe, where he basically, for the sake of summarizing, he basically learns a way to beat the blackjack tables. And sort of in the back of my head all those years ago, I thought, wouldn't it be cool, if I could do that one day, some way. But because I've been interested in sport, I used to sort of mess around. I used to fill out the football pools coupon for my dad, and eventually that sort of led me down this road to having a bet at the bookmakers, and that sort of got me off down that path and thinking about sport in the context of having a bet on it. So I had a good, I was going to say run of luck. It's never sort of been down to luck, although obviously circumstance sometimes dictates that. But I did reasonably well at the bookmakers, but of course then you get limited, and it's difficult to put the positions on, and they don't particularly like winners. So I pretty much drifted away from gambling because I just thought, well, there's no point. I can't overcome that. There's nothing I can do about it. And I sort of drifted off to a more normal career, but was very interested in doing something in financial markets. And it was through that I saw a presentation about betting exchanges. So as soon as they opened in the UK, I signed up to all of them straight away, including Betfair, and became one of their very first customers way back in June 2000.
Wow, that's incredible. And so, just in between that, what was your university education, or what industry were you plying your trade in between punting?
Well, I was always into sort of technology stuff. So yeah, basically, if it's got two batteries, then I'll probably buy it. And I love fiddling with technology. So my house and the office is full of it. And so I'd always had that interest in technology, and that was the sort of direction that I was headed in, really. Um, but I'd seen loads of really interesting things happen in the technology industry, but never seemed to be on the right side of it. I was sort of, working for Yahoo when Google was taking off, and I was always on the other side of all of the big things. I had the right path, but the wrong thing. And but I gradually got into more and more senior roles. But most of my education and my career had gone down that technology path for a number of years. And but I sort of got to the point in my career where I just thought I really want to do something for myself, and I've got to make that jump at some point. So Betfair came along at that particular moment in time, and I decided, despite there was no trading, no software, nobody had really thought about doing anything on Betfair, but I just saw the opportunity and thought, well, let's give it a go. And I was at that stage of life where I felt that I needed to do that. So I was just really glad that I did. It could have been another opportunity that went past me, but thankfully I jumped on it at that point.
And you just went chips in. You just quit your job and said, "This is it. This is it for me. I'm going to learn how to trade this and make a career out of this."
Yeah, well, originally what I started doing was arbing. So I was working for a German company. Funny enough, I'd worked for companies in the US and across Europe, but I gradually got into more and more senior roles where you stop doing things and you start managing things. And I sort of looked at another 30 or 40 years of doing that and just thought, don't think I can do that. So I was desperate to do something else, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. But I had a meeting one day, and after the meeting, the managing director called me over and said, "What were you doing in the meeting?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're on your laptop." And I sort of went, "Oh yeah, I just had to sort something out." And what I was actually doing is I was trading out of a position on Betfair.
Beautiful. That may or may not happen in the office here too.
He gave me an almighty bollocking, and it was at that point that I just thought, you know what, maybe really if I've got a position that's that big that I have to manage in the middle of a meeting, maybe I should think about doing it seriously. So yeah, I had three kids, and all of those things that everybody accrues by middle age. But yeah, I dumped it all and decided that this was going to be the thing that I wanted to do.
Wow. So was that ticking away for a little while you were still sort of contemplating that jump? Was that side income sort of, incrementally increasing to a point where it's like, you know what, this is pretty comfortable and I'm getting to a position where it's less risky? Or was it, you'd only touch the surface and you still went chips in? Because for me, it sounds like quite a large, career bet, particularly with the responsibilities of being a family man at that time. How risky in terms of how long had you been at your Betfair craft before you made the move?
Probably not long enough, if I'm honest, to be frank. And and everybody was surprised because I'd done okay and I'd had a pretty good career and all of those things. So when I said to everybody I was quitting, and they said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I sort of went, "Well, there's this thing called Betfair," and everybody's going, "Oh, isn't that gambling? Isn't that like what that sounds like?" And they just thought I'd basically lost it. I was going through a midlife crisis, and next I was going to get a fast car and a girlfriend and throw it all away. But I'd actually not done much up until that point. So I'd done a bit, but Betfair was still very young then. So it was a bit of a leap into the dark. But I think the thing that I learned from that was that actually those are probably good times to do that when it's still very small, very young, and people aren't particularly aware of it. But there wasn't enough coming in from it at that particular moment in time to be able to really seriously do it. And the biggest problem that I had was I didn't know if anybody else was doing it and whether it would last but I could see the potential there. So I thought I'll give that a go. And if that doesn't work out in sort of 18 months, 2 years, then I've got a few other strings to my bow and can probably, somehow scrape a living by on all of those other things if need be. So yeah, it was a bit of a gamble rather appropriately.
Yeah, beautiful. And was it just specifically, were you doing football matches then, or was it racing? What were you betting on?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing was I knew nothing about racing at that point. So when people talked to me about racing, I just didn't know the first thing about it. I didn't have a clue. So I actually started, because I had come from trading on financial markets. That was one of the things I was messing around with and trying out at that time. I actually started working on the financial markets on Betfair, of which there aren't that many, but that felt quite natural to me. I'd done a lot of work on football in many years before and in former lives, and that's what I was betting on with the bookmakers. So I did football as well. So it was really actually financial markets a bit and football. And I also did a bit of golf, but there was no racing for probably about 3 or 4 years for me because I just knew nothing about it at all.
Wow. And so just in terms of the strategy then, most of your stuff was just getting in and out of markets and using sort of financial trading methodology to trade those markets?
Pretty much so. And the problem that I had is, I knew there were people out there that could read the form of a horse race much better than me. And, they would look at the name of a horse and the type of race and they would be able to tell you something about it. But I was at a very basic level then. So what I decided to do was that I would trade it the same way that you would trade financial markets. So I was looking for order flow, patterns of behavior within the market. And I sort of broke it down in that sort of way because there was so much money on the horse racing markets that I just couldn't keep my hands off of it, basically. I looked, I was trading soccer and all of those other things. And I just kept looking at racing and thinking, well, there's so many races and so much money. I've got to find a way to crack it. And taking stuff from financial markets and putting it into racing was the way that I did it.
Beautiful. So obviously back then, that's all manual. When did you sort of see an opportunity to create a product for the API? Did you play with another tool before creating your own? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, back when I started, there was absolutely nothing. So there was not anything at all, basically. You had to go onto the website. So log onto the website, navigate to the market, find the odds, type in the stake, press the button, confirm the bet, and then you had to do it all over again. And that was never going to be viable if I was going to do it on a big scale. So I wanted to do loads of markets, loads of things. And but eventually some very rudimentary software came out. So they did exciting things like allow you to place a bet with one click or refresh it slightly faster. But that was quite useful for me at that point. And I worked with a couple of companies, funny enough, before BetAngel to use their software. This was in the very, very early days. This was even before Betfair had an API, and tried to sort of push them in the direction in which I wanted to go, because I was using lovely, great big financial market platforms to buy and sell oil and equities and indexes and stuff. And then there I was on Betfair just trying to place a simple trade, and I couldn't even get a little chart up. It was hopeless. So it eventually got to the point where I decided that I needed to create my own thing, and that was when BetAngel was created. But that was still fairly early on, even before Betfair had designed or implemented an API.
How big of an advantage were they back in those days, having that one-click betting functionality where most of the market wouldn't have? And to be frank, some of them still don't, or a gross proportion of the market are still unaware of that advantage. But back then, it must have been, you're just grabbing the best price all the time.
Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, it was nothing's ever easy, but when you look back at that particular time, it was pretty straightforward. There was nothing complicated about what you were doing. But in the same respect, the markets were slightly smaller. So, it was more straightforward, but there wasn't as much money on the table. And, as time goes on, I sort of always had in the back of my head that, back then I didn't even know if what I was doing was valid or not. No, I hadn't spoken to Betfair or anybody. And I thought maybe one day I'd just get a phone call from them saying, "Whoa, stop." But that never happened, of course. And it's a different sort of market now. But that was my concern then, was I didn't speak to anybody because I had no idea whether what I was doing was going to last or not, or whether it was going to take or develop into something much bigger than it was. But the advantage that you had using software was then, and still is, a massive advantage to anybody just going onto the site to place a simple bet.